make time today. So thanks to those MVP attendees. Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. Just a quick note, I'm actually going to be going through the presentation on another computer here, so if it looks like I'm not looking at my camera, that's why, but you have my full and undivided attention. So getting things underway, my name is William Moose. I'm a neighborhood transportation planner with the City of Boston, and I'm joined on the call today by Matt Moran, who's the head of our transit team at the city. We also have our transit team co-ops from Northeastern University on the call. Andrew McFarland, my colleague from the MBTA. And is there anybody else from the T on the call?
I think Eric's on the line.
Hey, it's Eric. Yeah, it's Eric Berkman. I'm Director of Transit Priority for the T.
Great. So thanks, Eric, for being here too. So that's the sort of city and T sort of side of the equation here for this project. So we'll go ahead and get things started. So we're here today to talk about a series of transportation improvements that are proposed for Columbus Avenue and Eggleston Square and the surrounding area. And before we get started, I just wanted to mention a couple of points to help things run a little bit more smoothly. This meeting is going to be recorded to be posted on the project webpage afterwards, just so everyone's aware. We're going to have time for questions and comments following the presentation, and we would just ask that you please mute your mic when not speaking. But do feel free to post questions and comments in the chat box throughout. We'll get to those at the end. And just to please also be courteous towards your fellow meeting participants. And once again, thanks for joining us. So quick project overview. We're really talking about two separate but very closely related projects today. The first one I'd like to mention is a city-led project that I'm really excited to announce we're kicking off basically right now, which is the Eggleston Square redesign project, which also has sort of accompanying that work related to creating bicycle connections, improving the bicycle network through the neighborhood, and neighborhood traffic calming. And we've retained the services of Kittleson associations for planning, design, and design work and help with the community process. They really are national leaders on the issues around creating safe and equitable transportation facilities. So we're very excited to be working with them. And I think they'll deliver a really great project for the city and for the neighborhood. And so the goals of this project are mostly looking at creating like high quality crosstown bicycle connections from Franklin Park and the Blue Hill Ave Seaver Street corridors to the Southwest corridor, and making some additional safety and public realm improvements in Eggleston Square itself. And as I mentioned, we'll be kicking that off this summer, basically right now. So we'll probably be looking to get a first sort of public meeting on the books in the next few weeks. That would most likely be online as well, but we'll certainly be doing, trying to do safe and responsible, sort of socially distanced sort of visits to the neighborhood to do site walks with the community, hear concerns, talk through sort of potential options. So anyway, that project we'll talk about in a bit, but I wanted to sort of give a quick overview. And then the other project that we're here to talk about are the bus lanes on Columbus Ave and some associated pedestrian safety improvements. This project is a collaboration between the City of Boston and the T, the MBTA. And you can see the corridor outlined here. This is the sort of the scope of work. It's about 0.8 miles, running from Walnut Ave to Seaver Street by Franklin Park in the south, up to Center and Ritchie Street by Jackson Square in the north. This corridor serves 3 high ridership bus routes that can face a lot of congestion, particularly in pre-pandemic times, but even now, these are very high ridership lines that face congestion throughout the day. And so to sort of improve the quality of service for transit users along this corridor, we're proposing center running bus lanes. It would be served by new bus stop platforms. which we'll see sort of how that will look in just a couple of slides. And as I mentioned, we're proposing a handful of key pedestrian safety improvements along the corridor that we think will help make the corridor much safer for people walking as well. And we're potentially looking at an implementation for this fall. The project is fairly far along. We did a fairly thorough community process up until everything shut down in March. There's a possibility that that we could begin implementing sort of late summer, early fall, but if not, we would hopefully be doing it first thing in the spring of the following year. So diving into this project, the Columbus Ave project, in a little more detail, I'd like to talk a little bit about the planning context and where this came from. So first off, we have Go Boston 2030, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's the city's long-range transportation plan. And this plan has basically lays out an ambitious roadmap to make Boston, a more sort of a sustainable city with a lot of projects in favor of improving walking, public transit, and cycling, and making those modes more attractive to help reduce driving alone and fight congestion and climate change. And so, all of the projects that we do at the city, we're really looking at them through this lens of the mode share goals of this project that are trying to make the other modes that aren't driving alone more attractive and increase those modes. So both the Columbus Ave project and the Eggleston Square project, sort of are happening with that as the backdrop. Another point on Go Boston 2030 was that there was a project in that plan that called for making Columbus Avenue a more multimodal street. As you all probably know today, it is a very sort of car-centric street, 4 lanes of traffic or more at some points, parking on both sides, and it can feel a bit hostile if you're in any other mode of transportation. So, we're working through this project to sort of address that imbalance and make things more comfortable and better for other modes of transportation as well. The plan JP Rocks was a BPDA plan, which mostly looked at land use and housing issues, but it did make some transportation recommendations in line with the improvements that we're proposing for Columbus Ave. And then following that, BTD, my department, launched the JP Rocks Transportation Action Plan process, where we had a series of public meetings, surveys, pop-ups, and got a lot of great feedback from the community about what their concerns were and sort of ideas for projects of how we could improve transportation moving forward in the neighborhood. And of those, the Columbus Avenue bus lanes were really the kind of the project that had the most sort of consensus and excitement about all of them. Although several other projects at the Eggleston Square redesign also garnered a lot of support, and as well as a number of projects in that that emerged from that process, suggesting improvements for cycling and for pedestrians on neighborhood streets. So, and the last sort of planning context thing that I'll mention before we dive into the project itself is that the project overlaps with a significant portion of a proposed Mattapan to Longwood Medical Area rapid bus route, which of course has the objective of connecting the Mattapan neighborhood with all the jobs and medical services that are in the LMA. So, by moving this project forward, we're sort of knocking out a significant chunk of this important project as well, that we're hoping to advance through some of the other transit priority projects that the city and the T are working on together on Blue Hill Ave, and then hopefully in the coming weeks and months, sort of starting to talk about potential improvements for Seaver Street and sort of Columbus Ave north of this proposed corridor as well. So a quick word on the public stakeholders. We have Boston Transportation Department, again, that's my department, on one side, and we manage traffic signals, street widths, curb regulations and how the lanes are assigned. And we're working very closely with our partners at the T, who actually run the operations and maintain all the transit facilities. So that's sort of the partnership behind this particular project. And so I'd like to say a bit now just about how we got here in terms of the community process. So starting back in November of last year, we started having some conversations with the community about different alternatives for the Columbus Ave corridor, sort of building on the ideas that had come out of all those previous planning processes that I mentioned in the last couple of slides. And that sort of culminated in January, late January. We had 2 open houses, one at the Eggleston Square YMCA, and then another one at the Eggleston Square Branch Public Library. And we got a lot of good feedback from the community at those 2 meetings. And we also did a series of merchant walks, visited small businesses, left flyers with information or contact information, talked to them about the project, heard what their concerns were. We presented a number of times at the Eggleston Square Neighborhood Association, to the Jamaica Plain Public Service Committee. We've also consulted with important local stakeholders in the neighborhood like Urban Edge and JPMDC that build and manage affordable housing in the community. The Eggleston Square Main Street District has been a good partner, as well as the Líderes Comerciantes de Eggleston, who are a group of mostly Spanish-speaking small business owners on Washington and Columbus, right there in Eggleston Square. So we met with them to talk about the project as well in February. The Academy Home Tenants Council, we presented there about the project and answered questions, as well as the Boston Housing Authority, which obviously includes the Doris Bunte Apartments, which is a very important sort of constituency of our seniors living right there on the corridor. And finally, we've had briefings with state and city elected officials. And I just want to say a quick word here. We also understand and recognize that because of the sort of unique and unfortunate circumstances that we're in with COVID, we did obviously have plans for more in-person engagement, but we are trying to find ways to do that safely and responsibly so that we're not endangering ourselves or the public. But we do understand that connecting online isn't for everybody in the community and that it presents its challenges. So we definitely want to, if you have suggestions on how we can make this outreach more effective and make sure that we're not leaving anybody out of the process, and we don't want to take anybody by surprise with this project. We have tried like flyering the corridor as well in advance, just so that people who are down on the street on Washington Street and Columbia Street know about the meeting. But again, we're happy to entertain sort of constructive criticism on how we could do better with the engagement as well during this time. So what we've heard from the public meetings and all the conversations that we've had with the community, a couple of key concerns stand out. One is the transit delays, that congestion was certainly an issue pre-COVID, and as things open back up again, is likely to continue to be a major issue on the corridor. And that's an issue for the roughly 8,000 daily riders that use the 3 bus lines on this corridor today. And unlike some other parts of the city, Columbus Ave, being a very busy street, is actually fairly congested at numerous points throughout the day in both directions. So that's why we're proposing for the bus lanes to be an all-day condition in both directions, as opposed to the sort of peak period bus lanes that we've put on some streets, like in Roslindale. We've also heard a lot about the uncomfortable conditions that exist today for people who are walking, cycling, or even just sitting and waiting for the bus, right? That it can feel very uncomfortable as cars fly by you on the corridor, and certainly crossing the street on foot, on bike, in a wheelchair. It's can be a very kind of scary prospect for people today. So we want to find opportunities to make that better too through this project. And then we also heard from both residents and businesses that parking is very important, and that we should make our best effort to retain it wherever possible on the corridor. So we have tried to do that as well through the design process. So the proposed improvements that we're calling for, again, center running bus lanes, we'll see what that looks like in just a second, that would operate all day, inbound and outbound. The buses that use the corridor would be the same buses, the same few bus lines that operate there today, albeit they'll be getting much better service. And there'll be 8 new bus stop platforms, so 4 bus stops with 8 platforms to serve passengers boarding and getting off the bus. And then a number of pedestrian improvements on the corridor, including upgraded crosswalks, accessible ramps for people with reduced mobility along the corridor, curb extensions, which is what you see in this image here, where we sort of bump out the sidewalk at key points to make the crossings shorter, which reduces the possibility for conflict between pedestrians and drivers, and also makes pedestrians and drivers more visible to each other. So we're proposing a few of those, as well as some new pedestrian signals where they don't exist today. And we are going to have, as I mentioned at the outset, a parallel process for bike network enhancements and neighborhood traffic calming that will launch through the Ellison Square redesign process. So the existing conditions today, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. It's basically a 4-lane cross section, 2 lanes in each direction, with parking in both directions. And then periodically, you have these spaces here for the bus to pull aside that are designated no parking. So that's the existing condition, and then a fairly narrow median, about a 4-foot median that runs most of the corridor. And so this is what the proposed conditions would look like with the project constructed. This is looking out towards Franklin Park. You have the Doris Punta apartments here on your left, and sort of Eccleston Square would be behind us. So you can see here how this would work. The center lane of traffic would be reallocated to buses only. Passengers would board the buses via these marked crosswalks at signalized locations. So you don't have to, be, if you're boarding the bus, waiting for the mercy of a driver to yield to you. You would get, drivers would get a red light, and then you would cross to access the bus platform. As you can see here, parking is generally retained on the corridor, except for the locations where we need to have the bus boarding platforms. And then where that happens, the general travel lane is shifted kind of behind the back of the bus platform. But I should note that sort of where buses stop today, on-street parking isn't permitted. So the overall sort of net change in parking on the corridor is not 0, but it's it's fairly modest, and we tried to keep it that way. Again, based on those conversations we had with the community. I'd like to also just say a quick comment about why did we go for center running here, and why did we sort of take this as our preferred alternative to the community and go through all these conversations about why we feel like this is the best option for this corridor. The city and the MBTA came to this project when we really started diving into the planning last year with a lot of lessons learned from bus lanes that we've implemented in other neighborhoods in the city and also in other municipalities in Greater Boston in the case of the MBTA. And while those projects that are sort of the side running bus lanes that either run along the curb or parking in places like Rosendale on Washington Street or on Brighton Avenue have been, I think, quite successful at moving buses sort of faster and more reliably. They still have some, at times, serious challenges with enforcement because drivers are tempted to park in them or double park in them or sort of cheat into them and treat them like a general travel lane. And so, we want this bus lane to really be sort of self-enforcing through good design so that we don't have to rely on enforcement to have good quality bus service at all times on this corridor. And so by putting the buses in the middle of the street, we really remove all the conflicts and friction that can happen along the curb. And we also feel like drivers will be much less likely to cheat into the bus lane with it in the center of the street. And I'd just like to say, make this point that ultimately the purpose of the project is not just about moving the buses faster, but also moving them more reliably. So, because today, there can be a lot of variability just from day to day, and also depending on the time of day and how much time it takes a bus passenger to get from, sort of the Walnut Seaver Street intersection to Jackson Square. Maybe one day it'll take you, 10 minutes, and another day it'll take you 20 minutes. And with this project, we're really hoping to reduce that variability or eliminate it, so that riders can have a very sort of consistent experience using the bus on this corridor, when they need to get to the doctor or get to work or whatever their travel need is, right? Just one other thing that I'll say about that's important about having efficient bus service at this time on this very high demand corridor is that, in the times of COVID, we really need to maintain good bus service. A large share of the passengers who are riding the buses still, and by the way, the routes that are on this street still have very high ridership relative to sort of the pre-pandemic era, right? And many of those we know are essential workers, and the only way that we can really ensure that that social distancing can happen both as people wait for the bus and are on the bus is if we can run buses efficiently so that they're not getting snagged up in general traffic and bunched up at the bus stops and overcrowded. One last point that I'll make before we move on from this slide is that another benefit of this sort of configuration is that we heard a lot about how high the speeds are on Columbus Ave, particularly if the traffic is light. Drivers can really fly down Columbus, and we know that's an existing safety issue. And by sort of narrowing down the traffic lanes a little bit for general traffic and introducing these bus stops here that kind of makes the traffic do a little bit of a jog, we think that'll get drivers actually going much closer to the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit and address those speeding issues. And then also by having, for most of the corridor, just one lane of traffic in each direction, general traffic in each direction, we think it'll make the street feel much safer to cross as well. And then almost every crosswalk at the corridor, except for this mid-block crossing back here that we'll see in just a second, almost every sort of crossing along the corridor now has these bus stops at it, which serve as sort of nice, sort of beefy pedestrian refuges as you're crossing the street. So we hope that that will address a lot of those concerns as well. You can see here what it's going to look like on the ground view. I'd like to mention as well that we have some pretty significant accessibility improvements with this configuration. The center running configuration really prevents the possibility of someone parking in front of the bus stop, which can prevent the bus from reaching the curb and then serving someone who's in a wheelchair or has some other mobility need. So we see that as a major sort of benefit from the accessibility standpoint. These platforms will, of course, be completely ADA accessible. They're about 10 feet wide. Here at the crosswalk, they'll ramp up, and that will, of course, again, be an accessible ramp. And the sidewalk, or the reveal of the platform, so the height of the platform is about 9 inches, which is 3 or 4 inches higher than we could do if it were sort of along a standard sidewalk. That might not sound like much, but what that actually means is that being 9 inches up instead of 6 or 5 inches up is that we get what's called near level boarding, which just makes it easier for people to step onto and off of the bus, makes the boarding process a little bit faster and more comfortable for passengers as well. So here's just another bus stop rendering. And and you can kind of see what this is going to look like in more detail. You can see it has a pretty substantial shelter. The shelter is about the length of 3 standard bus stops, to give you an idea of the size. So it's definitely much more substantial than anything that exists on the corridor today in terms of bus stops. And this is what the shelter would look like from behind. So you can see how we're planning to protect passengers as they wait for the bus, have a sort of concrete wall separating traffic from the bus stop, and then a fence on top of that wall that should provide hopefully a lot of comfort and safety for passengers as they wait. And I should actually mention as well that you can see that these platforms are protected by these little concrete noses as well to help make sure that the passengers stay safe as they're waiting for the bus. So this is very similar to the condition that you would see like out on the E branch of the Green Line by, say, like the Fine Arts stop, museum stop. Fairly similar to that. So some of the other features that will be included on these upgraded bus stops, in addition to the shelters that I already mentioned, will be seating, signage, lighting, trash cans, countdown clocks that will have real-time information about when the next bus is arriving, emergency call boxes to contact the transit police. And then when the T is ready to roll out automated fare collection, there's also space reserved on the platform and an electrical hookup to hook up a fare vending machine. So that will be a feature that will come later on, but the platforms are being built for, or being planned for, I should say, now. So at this point, I'm going to drop out of the presentation for just a second and kind of take you through the corridor block by block and talk about what the proposed changes are so everybody can get an understanding of the project as we go along here. Again, I would encourage you, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to write them in the chat box, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation when we go through all the questions. So yeah, we'll just dive right in, and I'll just say, before we get in, once again, we're oriented here with Franklin Park, Walnut Street, Seaver Street, and then up here is where Jackson Square, Marcella Playground are. So just opening up the roll plan here. So here, approaching Walnut Avenue is where the bus lane will taper in, and we'll handle this transition by basically having one of the 2 general travel lanes become a right-only lane onto Walnut Ave. And then once the bus moves through the Walnut Ave intersection, we have our first stop here at Walnut Street, where the existing stop is today. We're shifting the crosswalk just a couple of feet down to access the new platform. And I should mention that anytime you see these crosswalks in black, the pavement markings in black, these ramps here, that's indicating where we're taking on work, reconstructing ramps to make them wheelchair accessible, striping in new crosswalks, that sort of thing. So the bus would stop here, allowing passengers to get on and off, and then continue along the corridor. Here at this location, there's an existing crosswalk today, mid-block crosswalk today. This is at the Eggleston Square branch of the Boston Public Library. We, unfortunately had a pedestrian fatality here in 2016, and there hadn't really been any significant safety improvements to this location since then. So, we're proposing to make some pretty significant enhancements here. This is where we're going to do those curb extensions that I mentioned earlier that will shorten the crossing for pedestrians and make them more visible to drivers so that, a pedestrian waiting to cross isn't blocked by a parked car, to the visibility of a driver. We're adding these yield markings here in advance of the crosswalk, and also one of those signs with the rapid flashing beacons at this location which we think will help during the day, but also especially at night, to make this crossing more visible and safe for pedestrians. Striping in a new crosswalk here at Cleve Street, where one doesn't exist today. Rebuilding these ramps at Dixwell Street and adding a crosswalk and a stop bar there. And then approaching Eggleston Square, we have our next stop, which is by the Doris Bunte Apartments, the roundhouse. And there's an existing crossing again today with a light here for pedestrians. So we're taking advantage of that and using that to help pedestrians access the bus platforms. And very, very early on, we spoke with the Boston Age Strong Commission about the project, the city's Disabilities Commission, with Boston Housing Authority, and we heard loud and clear that that they wanted these stops to stay as close as possible to their current location, because we recognize that there are a lot of seniors who need to use the bus here, and so we're doing everything we can to keep it as close as possible. The only thing is that those stops are now shifting here into the center of the street. Again, reconstructing ramps here at Weld Avenue to make them ADA compliant. And then as we get to the Washington Street and Columbus intersection in Eggleston Square, the right-of-way, the street widens a little bit, so we have room to introduce a left turn lane here, which we think is going to help, with traffic flows along the corridor, but also an issue that was identified for us early on by the neighborhood, and then we did traffic counts, which showed that, of course, the neighbors were totally right. Weld Avenue is being used for quite a lot of cut-through traffic. We counted about 1,600 cars in a day, which is a crazy number of cars to be going down a narrow little residential street. And that's drivers either trying to skip this intersection, or when there's a left turn prohibition at Columbus, they use that to go down Washington Street. So by basically removing that left turn, I should also say that left turn today is not a particularly safe left turn because it has to happen across 2 lanes of traffic. So we feel like we can improve the safety on the corridor and keep Weld Avenue more for residents. We're still, of course, retaining an option for residents to get to the street. They just now have to turn left and then use schools, or turn left, do a U-turn rather, to get onto Weld Avenue. Yeah, so there's that. And then on the other side of the intersection, you can see that we've introduced a right turn only lane, which doesn't exist out there today. This is actually another pedestrian safety benefit that we've, because we identified also conversations with the community, a lot of complaints about how hard it is for drivers to see pedestrians in these 2 crosswalks, and how, because the intersection is so large, drivers can get up quite a lot of speed before they see somebody in the crosswalk. So by separating this out, we can actually hold the right turns while we let pedestrians cross these legs of the intersection, which helps reduce the wait time for pedestrians and also remove that potentially dangerous conflict with right turns. So continuing down the corridor, our next stop is at Bray Street. We're adding another crosswalk to access this platform here at Bray. You can also see that on West Walnut Park and on Bancroft Street, we're adding another pair of curb extensions on each of those streets. These, today, if you know the corridor and walk down the corridor, you'll know that these crossings can feel kind of uncomfortable because these streets meet Columbus at a very sharp angle. So the crossing is very long, and drivers have to pull up quite far to see down the corridor. So by bumping these out, we're going to shorten the crossing. Drivers will need to take these turns onto the turn onto Bancroft Street a little bit slower, and it'll also help with visibility for pedestrians and drivers. Arriving at Bragdon Street, this is another location where we have room to put in a left turn lane. So that will remain there. in both directions. We've got a left-only lane. And then continuing down, Dimmick Street is the final bus stop here of the corridor. That, of course, serves some important destinations, the sort of dense brick row houses, the New Horizons for Homeless Children offices that are going in here at this corner, and also, of course, the Dimmick Center. And then continuing on down from Dimmick Street, you can see there's a couple of other spots along the corridor where we're adding crosswalks where they don't exist today, like Academy Road and Amory Street. And then we get to the last sort of major intersection of the corridor in this project, which is Center Street and Ritchie Street. And another benefit of having the bus in the middle here is that, as you probably know, the next move that it needs to make is to get into this left turn lane here and then turn into the Jackson Square busway. And so by having the bus here, it positions it better to get over and into the correct lane. And we're calling for a transit priority signal at this location to give the bus a couple of seconds head start and get ahead of the general traffic and get in line to make that turn. So then in the southbound direction, it's basically generally a mirror image of the northbound direction. After you cross the Center Street intersection, this lane here, we actually don't have the pavement marking there, but this is proposed to become a right-only lane onto Amory Street. We retain the parking all along here. And then it's generally a single lane of traffic along Columbus Ave, except for those couple of key intersections we saw, like Bragdon and Eggleston Square, where we have room to put in some turn lanes, where we have need to accommodate more traffic volumes. So that is the role plan, and was pretty much all that I have for the Columbus project, but I did want to go into just a little bit more detail about the scope of work for the Eggleston Square redesign and the neighborhood transportation improvements that are proposed as part of that. So the limits of the project you can see here kind of in this funny looking shape that include the Eggleston Square intersection here, which we'll be looking to make some additional safety improvements to, and then sort of all the streets that are encompassed in here, sort of going from Boylston Street and Chilcott in the south, Walnut Street and Washington Street over to the east, Dimmick Street in the north, and then the southwest corridor in the west. And the goals of this project are prioritizing bicycle safety and comfort, prioritizing walking, pedestrian safety, and accessibility, recognizing, of course, that Columbus and Washington are important regional streets that carry a lot of traffic. We still want to manage traffic flows, but make sure that that's not negatively impacting any of the more vulnerable road users. And also working with the community to identify opportunities to potentially improve the public realm, the public spaces that exist here in Eggleston Square, right here in the square, up here, the Urban Edge parcel, and down the Peace Garden. So looking at opportunities where we can maybe help make those sort of a little bit better and serve the community's needs a little bit better and tie them together a bit better as well. And then through all of this, sort of cutting across all these goals, we're going to be looking for tactical sort of short-term improvements that we could make potentially with just paint and flexible posts, that sort of thing, where we can maybe get some safety improvements quickly and cheaply out on the ground until we can sort of design that through the improvements through a community process and get them implemented permanently. And so just a quick word on the bike connections that we're hoping to make here. The goal really is to provide safe, high comfort conditions for all ages and abilities to make this sort of crosstown connection from Franklin Park the Seaver Street and Blue Hill Avenue corridors, sort of the neighborhood here on the north and east side of Columbus and Washington, and also the neighborhood here on the sort of south and west side um, of Columbus and Eggleston as well. And so we would be looking at doing this. The yellow arrows here sort of just indicate the general direction, the desire line, but they're not intended to like prescribe any particular streets or treatments at this point. That's something that we would be looking at again with the neighborhood, identifying what the opportunities and challenges are and sort of what the potential improvements are that we could make on these streets to make them more sort of calmed, to manage the volume and speed of cars driving down these neighborhood streets so that they're comfortable for people walking, for people biking. And we'll be looking at doing potentially, again, through conversations with the community, looking at options like potentially speed humps, if where there's dimension, maybe contraflow bike lanes, that's bike lanes that flow in the opposite direction to help make connections, or even potentially changing the directionality of some of the neighborhood streets if there is an appetite to do that to better sort of serve these connections to the Southwest Corridor and other important neighborhood destinations. So quick word on the timeline. The bus lanes, we're looking to have final design review in August and then construction starting either in late summer 2020 or if that slips for some reason, hopefully first thing in the spring of 2021. And the Eggleston Square redesign and the associated bicycle and traffic calming improvements, we're going to launch the planning and design and community process really right away this summer, which we anticipate that continuing through the winter. Again, bicycle accommodations will be a top priority of this project. One of the things that we heard in a lot of the public meetings was that while there was a lot of support for the idea of bus lanes, a lot of the community was disappointed that there weren't dedicated bike facilities proposed on Columbus Ave as part of the project. And so, we really want to, it's an important goal of the city to make cycling safe, make it comfortable, encourage more people to use it. And so we really want to look at how we can make sort of neighborhood alternatives, traffic calms, pleasant riding experiences on neighborhood streets to access important destinations, how we can make that a reality. And as I said, we'll be looking at tactical improvements potentially on an accelerated timeline with the goal of making sort of bringing the project's implementation sometime in 2021. So that's all I have for you. I'm sorry I've blabbered on for a long time, but we can certainly take a little bit more time. We can go past 7 o'clock if we need to, and if people want to stay and ask questions, provide comments. Again, I would encourage you to reach out to me if something comes to mind after the fact that you want to follow up on or ask some questions. Please email me. I try to be pretty diligent about getting back to those quickly and keeping track of them. And you can also see a link here to the project's webpage where we'll continue to post updates. There's also a project mailing list that you can sign up for at this link where we can keep you posted on any other updates that are happening for the project. So thanks so much. I'm going to shut up for a moment and we can look at all of the questions. So.
Hey, William, I think that we had a few questions, one from Mela Miles. Mela, do you want to repeat your question or would you rather I just summarize it?
Yeah, am I going to ask it live or?
Yeah, you can if you want to.
Okay, so I was asking about, that's a bottleneck of traffic, and I lived right in Eggleston Square for a while, and you know, where the bus lanes are going, you leave one lane for traffic, and that can cause, you know, stalling of traffic because no other vehicles can drive in the bus lane, of course. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but this increases asthma rates and things where you have a lot of, you know, added particulate matter added to the air in that area. What is being done to address the congestion that will result from this project? You can have a traffic jam going all the way to the dang transportation building from Eggleston Square. I'm just saying.
Mm.
Hey, Mela, this is Matt Moran from BTD. Good to hear from you. Hope you're doing well.
Hi, Matt.
I just want to take that question. So we've done some other bus lane corridors. We started to get like a general sense of traffic and how traffic changes on these corridors. So what we've seen is that actually traffic tends, like the number of cars on a corridor tends to drop when you actually put a bus lane in. So the one example I have sort of handy is Brighton Avenue. So we installed a new bus lane on Brighton Avenue between Union Square in Alston and Packett's Corner, and also in Alston. And what we saw between traffic counts is that there was actually a 13% drop in the amount of vehicles that were on the corridor. During that same time, we also saw that there was a increase in transit ridership by about 10 to 15%, sort of in the first year of operation for the Brighton Avenue bus lane. So to your point, there will likely be some change, but at the end of the day, you know, traffic doesn't tend to get a lot worse. What tends to happen is that people find either alternative routes. So they decide, you know, instead of going up Seaver Street, Columbus Ave, I'm going to take a different connection altogether. Or they decide to switch modes. So people decide to walk, bike, take the bus because the bus is now a lot more reliable than it was before. So, and then, you know, that's sort of tends to be the trend when you do these projects where you eliminate roadway space. And, you know, it's just not exactly, it's not just in Boston, but we've seen it in other cities around the world too.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. And if I could just maybe add one more point, you know, I think it's a great question, and obviously congestion was a concern. You know, we did sort of do extensive traffic modeling as well, which of course, you know, it's not perfect, but we do think that by sort of tweaking how some of the traffic signals work, you know, moving some of the pedestrian moves to concurrent phasing, which basically means that it's happening, you know, while some of the vehicle movements are happening. You know, we can actually move traffic almost as efficiently as, you know, sort of in the pre-build condition. Again, I'm not going to say that it's going to work better with one less lane of traffic, but I do think that sort of, you know, trying to tweak out a little bit more efficiency from the traffic signals and the sort of phenomenon that that Matt has mentioned will help to kind of alleviate that to a considerable extent. Other questions? Sorry, I wasn't as I was presenting, I wasn't reading the comments coming in. So if any of my colleagues want to sort of mention the questions or
Sure. So
kind of together.
It was about engagement, and if we engage seniors from Amory Street Housing or the Roundhouse building or Academy Homes.
Yes, so we did present to the Academy Homes Tenant Council. You know, we've also had quite a number of email exchanges with them, and we met with Boston Housing Authority as well about the project. You know, talked through all of their concerns. They operate and maintain Doris Boonze apartments there at the Roundhouse. And so, you know, we've worked with them to help promote the project as well ahead of all the public meetings. You know, if we get to a point where we can have in-person meetings again, you know, for some of these future projects, they've also offered their community room for those meetings. So we have been communicating with them too.
There's another question
Other,
from Anne regarding improvements to travel times for the bus.
yeah, Matt, do you want to take that, or do you want me to take that?
I thought your answer this afternoon was pretty good, so
Sure.
go ahead.
Great. Yeah. Well, I would just say that it's a little bit hard to predict given the current sort of circumstances with COVID. But I think it's safe to say that sort of absent doing anything to help the buses as we reopen, traffic is going to worsen. And what we saw sort of pre-pandemic was that there was a lot of variability just day to day and both by time of day, as I mentioned in the presentation. Where maybe it takes you 10 minutes one day to go from Franklin Park to Jackson Square, and then another day it takes you 20 minutes. Sort of through this sort of series of improvements, we're really hoping that we can get that to like a consistent, say, 5 to 7 minutes, in an ideal sort of scenario. I think there will be time savings, but I think the other important thing beyond just the time savings is the improved reliability, that you'll have that consistency on an ongoing basis. So other comments, questions, concerns?
I think Blair had a question.
Sorry, what?
I think Blair had a question regarding which lane the bikes are able to use.
Yeah, so we're not like officially designating the bus lanes as a shared condition, and there were a couple of reasons for that. Very early on, we looked at that as an option, doing a shared bus bike lane as we've done in some other corridors in the city. But working with our active transportation team at the city, there were a couple of factors that they flagged for us that we felt wouldn't be necessarily an ideal or safe condition to make it a shared facility, namely the frequency of buses, especially during the peak where they come very frequently down this corridor, and there's sort of a recommended threshold of anything above like sort of buses every 4 minutes or is typically okay to share, not too many conflicts. Anything below that tends to lead to a lot of conflicts with buses and bikes. So that was why, that was one reason. And then the other reason is like, if you look down Columbus Ave, you can see the topography is kind of like sort of these rolling hills. And while, some cyclists might be able to race a bus up a hill, in general, the sense was that that would lead to differences in speeds between the buses and the bikes that could be potentially unsafe, which is why we're looking at instead doing sort of a thorough process to look at alternative connections through neighborhood streets to access destinations along Columbus Ave, Washington Street, and the Southwest Corridor. And maybe I'll just go back one more time to this slide, and I'll just make a quick point that we also consider dedicated bus or bike facilities, but short of removing all the parking on the corridor that we had heard from residents and business was a really important consideration. It would be challenging to get bike facilities in both directions, and on top of that, at this location, even if we were to eliminate all the parking where you have the bus stops, you would have sort of an odd kind of merging condition where bikes would have to merge with general traffic. So again, for all those reasons, we felt like we're not necessarily making the street worse for bikes, but we're really going for very, very high quality bus accommodations on Columbus Ave because of how important it is as a bus corridor today. And then prioritizing bike connections through a lot of the neighborhood streets. So, yeah, so going back to the questions.
William, I think Tim Reardon had a question.
Okay.
Hi, Tim Reardon
Um,
with Eggleston Square Main Street. Kudos to the city and the T for moving this forward. And I want to recognize the changes, positive changes made since the community meeting. I'm a little concerned about that baking in that left turn from Columbus onto Washington, inbound to outbound with this construction, because I think it's really problematic and you could have a lot of queuing into the bus lane. And I'm wondering if there's any way to accelerate a tactical kind of intervention, and test out in the near term this fall before construction takes place, what it would be like to have a right turn onto West Walnut, right turn onto Washington, straight through the intersection, rather than doing that. Because I just am concerned that if you're doing that construction now and baking in that lane, it's going to be harder to take that out later. So, and I think it's something you could test out, with a few signs and some paint for a month or two and see how it works.
sure. So you're talking about the sort of inbound direction, the left turn onto Washington Street, and you're concerned about that sort of spilling over into the bus lane there.
Yeah,
Did I get that straight?
that's correct. And that if
Yeah.
the alternative, it could be folks go through the intersection and then turn right on West Walnut, right on Washington, and then proceed straight through the intersection. So there's no left turn required. You get the traffic off Weld Ave, you eliminate all the left turns. So I think it's something to consider before you start installing a bus lane, because it's going to affect the configuration of the bus lane as well as the two travel lanes at the intersection.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We did, when we were looking at these, these options, we looked at what the existing sort of volumes were, turning left onto Weld and assuming that they would then turn left at Washington Street, and looked at what the queue links were. I'm not saying that they wouldn't spill back, but I think we could certainly do sort of a similar exercise to see what would happen if we were to alternatively route it down West Walnut Park. I think it's worth considering. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and we can certainly look through that option and consider that as we kind of fine tune the design. So thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I think Becca had a question regarding whether there's a parking utilization study for this corridor.
Yes, we did a parking utilization study. It was pre-COVID, and sort of what the study showed was that there was quite a lot of demand, kind of where you would expect it, right by sort of the commercial core of the neighborhood, on Columbus and on Washington Street. But that generally speaking, the rest of the corridor, there were usually available spaces throughout the day. Had something like a 75% occupancy rate kind of throughout the day. And I think what sort of has helped that is, like, as you go further sort of north along the corridor, a lot of the dense housing there does have its own sort of parking off street. But yeah, we did do a parking study, and I think we're also open to looking at parking regulations sort of in and around the square where it's unregulated today, and seeing if we could maybe make the curbside regulations work a little bit better so there's more turnover, potentially some designated loading zones that aren't there today, to help, help make the parking that stays on the corridor sort of more useful to businesses, and also to hopefully reduce some double parking.
William, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Richard Heath, Boston Bulletin. 3 questions, please. What is the amount of the Kittleson contract? How much do the bus shelters cost? How much each one costs? And who will build the bus shelters?
Okay, good questions. So the Kittleson contract is $500,000, and that is to basically take the project through design, the community process. We set aside $100,000 to hopefully do some of those early sort of short-term improvements that I talked about. So that's kind of how what the thinking about that is, and then once the design is complete, we would ask for funding from the capital budget to implement sort of the permanent recommended improvements. And then I can't speak off the top of my head about what the shelters cost. I don't know if some of my T colleagues might be able to respond to that question.
Hey, William,
Yeah.
it's Eric Berkman, Director of Transit Priority for the T. So it's about a total $9.5 million project. I don't know exactly what the shelters cost each, but they're designed specifically for here, and they're fabricated for these locations so that they can cover the entire depth of the platform. So if you're used to other shelters throughout the system, you kind of have this uncovered gap between the vehicle and the shelter. So you should be able to pretty much board underneath the shelter to get on the bus with windscreens and back inside windscreens to protect from splash and from traffic and from the elements. So I'm not exactly sure what they cost, but they will be nice. And the total, like I said, the total project cost is around $10 million, which will cover through our on-call, or potentially cover through our on-call contracts that we have at the MBTA.
William, can you?
So I'm sorry, I don't have. Go ahead.
Can you give me that price of the individual bus shelters at some point, and also who will build them?
Yeah, so I think Eric was just saying that at the tail end of his remark, that the T will actually hire the contractor who will construct this.
Yeah, so we haven't actually awarded the contract yet for construction, so I don't totally have the information on who's going to build it yet. But I can get you some more information on the finances for the project if you email me. I'll put my email address in the chat box for you.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions?
Yes, please. Can I ask a question?
All right, go ahead.
Sure, go for it.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Backmanger. I live on West Walnut Park, and I'm sorry I'm not following all of the different threads of conversations. It looks like they're all really important and good. I'm having trouble staying on track with all of them, so I'm sorry if my question is repetitive. So one of the threads is about creating bike access or rerouting up side streets off of Columbus, and I live on most of them, not actually, yeah, I think all of them are one way. And right now on West Walnut, there's parking on either side on both sides of the street. Cars tend to be pretty fast. There's some new construction now that's going to have a garage with people turning in and out of a side street off of West Walnut. So I'm concerned about traffic increasing on the side streets. And have you done any, like, I can't visualize what the shortcuts would be for people who are driving a different route to skip bus lanes?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think the sort of looking at, because we understand that the neighborhood streets have really constrained conditions, which you just mentioned. They're one-way streets almost in their entirety. A lot of them are parked up pretty consistently on both sides. And that's residents using that parking, generally speaking. So, I think we would be looking at options where, we could do traffic calming. I think I mentioned this earlier in the presentation. So looking at things like speed humps, sort of other potential forms of traffic calming that both discourage drivers to use those as cut-through routes, but also the traffic that does go down those streets has to go at a roughly bicycle speed, right? So there's really no incentive or room to cut off a cyclist, to try to go faster than a cyclist, and sort of trying to create a network of streets that feel both very safe for people walking and biking. And I think there's a well-established sort of practice. These are often called bicycle boulevards, which sort of looks at creating sort of alternative paths that are traffic calmed on neighborhood streets. And I think, what I will say is that the consultant that we selected for this project, we selected specifically because their project manager, from my perspective, is one of the sort of national leaders in terms of bike network planning and thinking very creatively and out of the box with, under constrained conditions about how we can do that. They've done a lot of great work on the Neighborhood Slow Streets program with neighborhoods around the city. And so, in my mind, I feel like the sort of traffic calming and bike accommodations project is actually very similar in many ways to our Neighborhood Slow Streets program, if you're familiar with that, where we work very closely with the community to identify opportunities to sort of make the streets calmer and better for all modes of transportation, really, and trying to discourage the use of neighborhood streets for vehicle cut through. I hope that kind of hit on those questions. There might be a couple of locations where we could potentially look at dedicated bike facilities, like there may be enough to mention. But again, we're not going to come down with, with solutions from on high. We really want to talk through the menu of potential options with the neighborhood and sort of get something that feels right for the context of each street, right? So hopefully that answered the question. But if if you want to follow up with more questions and want more information afterwards, I'm happy to follow up.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Don't be shy. Don't be shy.
I think Sarah had a question regarding the number of employee parking spaces, or whether the parking studies show that any employees were parking in the area. And I think Anne had a question about bicycle boulevards and whether they are anywhere else in Boston right now.
Okay, yeah, good questions. So, sorry, the employee question, have you found the number of park spaces used for employee parking? Yeah, so I would say to that, the employee parking question, I don't have an exact count, but I do know that working with Denise Delgado, she flagged for me that the YMCA on Washington Street currently allows a lot of the businesses to park, for their employees to park at that location. So there's something like probably 20 or so spaces there in that parking lot that are used as employee parking. I think some other employees, just in conversations with the neighborhood, business owners or employees do sometimes park on Washington Street sort of all day long. And so, that's an issue that we flagged, in those conversations. And I think, we had, just as an example of sort of the path forward for this, how we might make this work a little bit better. We had conversations with businesses like Bravo Pharmacy and Picolux on Washington Street wanted short-term parking. The hair salon right next to them didn't because the owner parks right in front of the place. And so, we kind of worked out a compromise there that seems to be working pretty well for everybody, because now we got those 3 spaces regulated, so there's a bit more turnover there. But yeah, that's definitely something that we can look at in more detail. And I know that Denise was interested in kind of working with some of the businesses to see if there are opportunities to encourage some of the employees to take other modes, to walk or take the bus or bike or take transit instead of driving and using parking spaces on Columbus or Washington. And then the bicycle boulevard question, I would say that we've done the neighborhood slow streets programs in some sense are sort of a bicycle boulevard project, under another name. That being said, I think this one is more of a pure bike boulevard project, if we want to put a label on it, because we are trying very expressly to not just make the streets more comfortable, but also to have those streets function as neighborhood connections, right? And another important part of sort of the bike boulevard philosophy is that we look really closely at the sort of more significant street crossings. So you're talking about Walnut Street, Washington Street, Columbus Ave, Amory Street, and making sure that there are sort of accommodations in place at those locations so that not just the streets themselves, but also the crossings of those streets feel safe for people walking and biking. So, you know, I mean, a good example that comes to mind again, as well as the Bay State Road bike lane that, you know, I would encourage you to check out. That's a very nice sort of project that was planned as an alternative to the much more heavily trafficked street, Beacon Street. And so, you know, it's a slow street with not much traffic volume in one direction. The bikes share the street with cars. And then in the other direction, because it was the street was wide enough, we have a counterflow or contraflow bike lane that seems to work really well and provides a very nice and well-used sort of alternative for bikes. And so, other questions? Again, feel free to speak up. We don't have, it doesn't have to be just from the chat box. I want to.
There's a comment which I'll relay from Daniel Thomas. It's about commercial parking on Washington Street, and I suppose accommodating commercial parking. I guess, would you want to respond to that thought?
Sorry, let me find the exact question. Again, I haven't really had an opportunity to read through every one of these yet. Could you read the question for me, Matt? Sorry.
Sure. The question was, when you fail to accommodate commercial parking on Washington, they park on residential side streets and fire lanes and illegally reference pickle locks. Which that is.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we know that that's a concern. This project, I think the impact on Washington Street will be fairly modest overall, but I do think it's a concern, and that's why I mentioned earlier that I think we're going to be looking at, potentially options to tweak the curbside regulations a little bit. So right now, a lot of that parking is unregulated, which means that commuters can park there all day long, and they can walk, on Washington Street and then walk down and take the Orange Line into town. And then that can lead to double parking because those spots are basically occupied all day long and there's no turnover. So looking at ways that we can, maybe like accommodate a bit more turnover by maybe doing 2-hour parking, potentially working with the businesses, talking about, metered parking as an option if there's an appetite for that. And then I think if we see that it's a significant issue, I think we're also happy to work with the community at looking at the possibility of residential parking permits on some of the side streets to prevent sort of excessive parking on residential streets if we identify that as becoming a significant issue. So yeah, it's definitely something that we're not unconcerned about, and we want to be monitoring it and hopefully get ahead of it and address it if we do see that it's becoming a problem.
Some of the people who park there, there's schools over there, and there's in Eggleston Square on Washington Street, there's like a Y, there's Greater Eggleston, there's the Margarita Munoz School, which was Rafael Hernandez. So there's people who park there because they're going to work. And, putting 2-hour parking just causes over-enforcement of people's lives and getting their cars towed and high fees and things. It makes their life a living hell. So you have to understand the whole mixed use of that area. It's not just, and there's also people who live up above some of those stores that are there.
Sure.
There are people supposed to go there, they'll end up, just having a lot of fees and a lot of nightmarish situations with their cars. I don't know. I think you would really have to go and check in, and do a community survey of their, their parking habits, and not just assume that somebody parked there and went downtown or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate your comment, Pamela. I think you're exactly right. And, we wouldn't just go in kind of willy-nilly and change the regulations on the streets without, having sort of a thorough conversation and an understanding of what those streets are being used for today. And we definitely don't want to be punitive, punishing people who need to be, parking for longer periods of time. So, I mean, we really want to and I think, like I said, I referenced the parking, just those 2 or 3 spaces that we did at Bravo Pharmacy and Pickalox. They had been asking for a long time for 15-minute parking, and our enforcement from BTD was like, no way we want to do 15-minute parking. We can't enforce that, and doesn't work for some of the businesses, like the hair salon needs more than 15 minutes for people to go in and get a haircut, right? And then, as you said, right next to those businesses, there's housing. And so we really only tweaked the regulation at those 3 spaces. I'm trying to recognize, again, and balance all those needs. So, not saying that we're going to get everything perfect every time, but that's why it's really important to talk to the community that has a much better understanding of what the concerns and needs are. And like I said, we wouldn't be trying to force anything without, again, first having those conversations and understanding what needs are being served there. So really, thank you for that comment.
You can't always engage the community online because everybody does not use that. And if you don't do multiple languages, then there's a problem with that as well. A lot of Latinos living over there, Latinx or whatever we say. So you have to really just not be so technology heavy when you're engaged in these communities, because I've done community engagement and lived there for a number of years. So I'm telling you what the community needs are around Eggleston Square, having lived right in the area for quite some time.
Yeah, I think that's a super valid criticism. And, we recognize the shortcomings of this. I think we did try to do a lot of work sort of pre-COVID to do a lot of in-person outreach, and flyer those streets. And I think, again, to your point, we've I want to say that we've had overall a very good and productive relationship with the neighborhoods and the neighborhood sort of stakeholders through this process. So we've really, they've been very helpful in helping us get out the word, make connections, and we would be, like I said, looking to do exactly the same thing, not doing exclusively online outreach. Like I said, we're willing to go down and do like a socially distant site visit and walk the street and hear what the issues are, that sort of thing as well. So I really do value, what you're saying, and I do want to say that we are, again, we understand that we can't reach everybody this way, but we are doing 2 public meetings tomorrow as well, entirely in Spanish, we're really trying to get a good turnout for that, get a lot of the local businesses to come so they can have another update on the project. So yeah, again, not saying we're doing everything perfectly. We definitely understand their shortcomings, but I really appreciate what you're saying, and we do want to have the engagement be appropriate for the community.
Hello.
Thank you. Sorry.
If I may, so I'm actually a resident at 225, and the view literally out of my window is that street. I do really appreciate, on behalf of all of the people who ride on those buses, I have not seen those buses not stop being busy with passengers in a time when we're trying to work on seeing the injustices, the racial injustices in our community. I really appreciate, I'm happy to have these bus lanes come through my neighborhood. I've watched, as I've said in the comments, I've watched buses during rush hour, pre-COVID, have 22 buses sitting back to back to back on that block during rush hour. And then even as we've slowly reopened the economy and people have been going back to work and driving, traffic has gone back to almost rush hour levels. And I think it's really happening at probably the best time. And I'm really glad to see that the project is moving forward as it is. I'm glad to see, I really, really appreciate that it's going all the way here to Center Street. So that way the buses aren't also getting tied up in the left turn queue onto Center Street, which can also be just as damaging to the bus headways and the regularity of the 22 bus and the multiple buses that come down this lane. So again, thank you very much for all of the work and the engagement that you guys have done. My building manager actually shared this this email with the other residents, and so again, I really appreciate the time and effort that you put into this.
Thank you, Mark, and I think your observation is right, right on the money too. I mean, the essential workers really, I think, are the bread and butter, or the riders who are still using this corridor, and just as of last Friday, I think we saw that the 22 ridership level was at like 55% of the pre-COVID level, which is amazing because commuter rail is in the single digits of the pre-COVID levels. So it just speaks to how much need there is still for this service and for it to be good quality service, which is really, again, what we're trying to do with the project. Other questions, comments, concerns, things you like, things you hate?
Something real quick, and then I have to leave after that. But Zach, I live in the neighborhood, and we our 11-month-old goes to daycare right next to the Hernandez School on School Street. So we're walking in the neighborhood on foot every day, and it's like the safety issues and the congestion, like the quality of life around like just vehicle fumes and just like the speed of the traffic and people being frustrated with the whole corridor, and just like you said, going down Weld Street, taking shortcuts. I think this is an amazing project. I've seen buses get stuck on Columbus at Washington for like 3 light cycles. Like, no joke, like the same bus at the same intersection for like 3 light cycles. That's crazy. So this is really great. I am a cyclist, but I totally understand, and I see in the chat that it really is I understand that this is a balancing act. So one thing that I have a question about is if there's anything being done with the traffic signaling right at Eggleston Square to deal with flow on Washington Street, because that's like, and obviously there's just too many cars on the road to really totally address it. But that, especially between school, like 1 block from Columbus, either north or south on Washington Street, is just so brutal for anybody in that area, whether you're in a vehicle or outside of a vehicle, or like, so I just wonder if there's anything being done to help the flow on Washington Street right at the square.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one thing that we actually have noticed when we did survey out there was that there's actually just enough dimension on Washington Street that we could put in left turn lanes on each side, which, yes, that's a capacity benefit because it gets left turns out of the way of the through traffic. But also it could, if we go this route, having those left turns separated would be a big pedestrian benefit as well, because you probably know how long the light takes for pedestrians to get around. So a lot of pedestrians will just ignore the lights, and if Washington is going, they'll try to cross Columbus, and there's cars waiting to try to make a left turn in a gap in the traffic, and they might not see a pedestrian and then shoot down Columbus, and you can have a very unfortunate, sort of situation happen that way. So I think one thing that we're seriously considering, and I'm not, whether we do it through this project or have it bundled as part of the Eggleston Square project, I think we might consider looking at putting in a left turn lane, because there is a dimension to do that, to store a couple of left turning cars, which would, again, help capacity, and we could totally separate out that movement so that pedestrians could actually cross Columbus while Washington is going, and not have to worry about a car bearing down on them trying to turn left. So that's one of the solutions we've considered. I think it has potential.
Great. And that's the only thing I'm all for, I think just even the question about like cars getting stuck, I don't think they're going to on Columbus, because from what I observed from like my bike or from my feet is just like people get stuck behind each other because of double parking, because of unnecessary lane changes, because of people, not waiting their turn to take a left, jumping the gun on a green light and stuff like that, and blocking up the whole intersection for a whole cycle. So I think that we'll see the flow improvements because of the design that you guys did so far on Columbus. I'm just a little bit worried about Washington Street. still being in gridlock. But hopefully the 42 will someday run more than every half hour, and people will want to take that bus.
Yeah, and and definitely again, the left turns are something that I think we're seriously considering. So maybe if that's something that again we didn't really have a chance to sort of vet that change, but I do think that overall I think it would be greeted pretty favorably, since it, from my perspective, it doesn't really hurt anybody and is actually I think a pretty big improvement for both drivers and pedestrians. So thank you for that comment. Other questions? Comments? Yes? Yeah, I see somebody with their hand raised. Feel free to speak up. Oh, hello?
Oh, okay. I defined.
Yeah,
Jeffrey Ferris. A year and a half ago, when this project started, you were documenting a curbside bus lane, and then at some point you switched to the center bus lane. Do you have a documented comparison of both have their problems? Is there a documented comparison of the two, saying the pros and cons of each plan?
Yes, so we actually, so that's a great question. In the initial conversations, the thought was that it might be a side running bus lane. Again, I think, like I said, explaining the context, we sort of looking at sort of best practices around the country and the world. Frankly, like center running provides generally a better quality service for buses. But we did in May of last year do a thorough sort of technical memo looking at what the traffic implications of putting in a bus lane would be. At that point, we weren't really prescribing center or side running, but then we did sort of with the T and the city of Boston. A lot of us, the employees, got together, and we sort of looked through the options, the alternatives. We really closely considered the pros and cons of the different alternatives, and then in November we didn't. I want to say we didn't really come out of the gate with it's center running, take it or leave it. We had a lot of conversations about, here's what we're thinking, here's why, tell us what you think of it. Do you like it? Do you hate it? What issues do you see? And so we, and then there was also what's called a conceptual design report that we produced in December, which is a several hundred-page document of different analyses. That was, by that point, we had kind of had a lot of those conversations, and we were generally assuming a center running concept at that point.
So where do I see the side-by-side comparison of the two possibilities?
Yeah, I mean, I can share those reports with you if you want. We can also share sort of the early conceptual designs that we looked at when we were weighing the options. So if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to follow up with those resources.
I think this is not just for me. You've got a number of people talking about the lack of bicycle accommodation, and I think the public in general should be able to see what are the pro and con comparison of the curbside versus the center bus lane. What the rest of the world does, what we do in Boston, don't necessarily match just the way Boston, as we all know, is designed or not designed.
Mm. Yeah, I really appreciate that comment. Like I said, the thing that happened at the outset that I kind of explained in one of the questions was about whether or not this would be a shared facility, was that whether it was running on the side of the street or in the center of the street, the active transportation team from Boston Transportation Department, it was the same challenges with the grade and with the frequency of buses. That meant that while we're not going to tell a bold cyclist that wants to go in the bus lane they can't go in the bus lane, we don't, under any configuration, really want to necessarily formalize that as a shared facility, and that's again why we were looking at at alternatives to make those sort of more comfortable, neighborhood connections for cyclists who don't feel comfortable sharing, sharing traffic or riding in a bus lane. Yeah, so I definitely value that question, and I know that you having been a business owner who deals with cyclists for a long time in the neighborhood, I would truly deeply value your input on the sort of network planning side, helping us like identify alternatives and opportunities, challenges, all of that as well. So please stay in touch, and if you have questions and concerns and ideas, like send them to us.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? I don't want to miss any questions, so please, if you had a question that didn't get answered, speak up, or if not, if you don't want to talk in front of everybody, that's okay too.
William,
you can send me an email.
I'll speak. There were just a couple of things that I wanted to say. I am concerned about making left-hand turns down Columbus Ave going towards Center Street. That's something that you really have to think about, where the bus lanes are going to be. Also, please make sure that, like one of the ladies, Pamela said, when you have community meetings, to really get to people, because not everybody are technology savvy, and they need to really get the word out so that everybody can say that they're a part of this process. Because I know there are some seniors that are really concerned about trying to get to the bus stop, in the middle of the street. So, trying to have a conversation with everyone so that they really truly understand what's going on would be great. And I was wondering when you're planning on having these public meetings.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I think we, it's a bit of a challenge figuring out how we could safely host sort of the traditional and conventional public meetings right now. That's not to say that we don't want to do, a good job of reaching as many people as we possibly can and have them, provide an opportunity to, to talk to us about the project. So, what I've tried to do throughout this process is really go to the constituents themselves, which is why, we went in person to the Academy of Home Tenant Council to speak there. I actually had a lot of just one-on-one phone calls and email exchanges with people throughout this process, where they would have a concern or an idea, and we would talk it through over the phone with them. And so I think, we can safely do like flyering. We can work with our partners in the neighborhood to try to get the word out. We're public servants, really. So like we are meant to answer your questions and listen to your concerns and try to address them. Right? That's what we're here for, and we take that charge seriously. And so I don't have like a silver bullet for how we can reach everybody, but I can pledge that we're going to continue to do our best, and we're not just going to do exclusively like online engagement to reach people. If there's an opportunity where we can do, again, like when I spoke to some of the Academy of Home residents in advance of this meeting, a lot of them told me they couldn't make it, and so we're going to try to set up a conference call to have a follow-up with them specifically. So that's the sort of thing that I think we can safely do, and we might be able to also, before this project gets underway, I think we could look at doing something like a socially distanced site visit and walk for people who want to join us outside with masks, and but we want to also keep everybody safe. So it's a tough balance, but I completely recognize sort of the shortcomings and the failings of this, of this type of engagement. And I think you're exactly right. And if you have neighbors that you think are concerned that we've missed, I would encourage you to like have them write me. And if they want to talk on the phone, I'll call them, that sort of thing, you know? So we're not afraid of doing that kind of engagement.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other comments, questions, concerns? I know we're getting well past the hour that was scheduled, but so I mean, if people want to leave, they can, but I'm happy to stay for a couple more minutes if there's still anything that hasn't been addressed.
Hi, Sarah Freeman here. Do you know how many miles or blocks of expanded pedestrian or bike space Boston has done during the pandemic? I know they did some downtown and they're announcing a temporary Cummins Highway trial. I just put a link in the chat. Paris, which I know is a different world, is doing 50 kilometers, which is 31 miles. And there's a link to a video of a major thoroughfare that doesn't have 2 lanes of parking. They don't even appear to have 1 lane of parking. I'm not suggesting 0, but just wondering, I read some of the chat where a lot of new off-street parking is coming to the neighborhood, and just encourage really looking at the numbers and seeing if you could make it work.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question, a great comment, and we're certainly very aware of what's going on in places like Paris and Milan, and they're doing amazing work. You know, we're actually putting back out all the temporary bike sort of accommodations for COVID tomorrow night, I've heard. Tomorrow evening, all those are going to be reinstalled kind of in the sort of South End, downtown Back Bay area. And, you know, I think giving some insight into why we haven't, frankly, done a bit more is just that the head of our active transportation team is very sensitive to community concerns. And, you know, I think she wants to make sure that that it doesn't feel like it's a top-down imposed sort of solution, you know, on communities that don't have like an active bike planning process going. You know, it wasn't intended to like just go in downtown just to serve like the neighborhoods right around downtown. It was, truthfully, it was like those are the only neighborhoods that we can put these in without doing a thorough public process, right? And so, you know, I think it does get to that equity concern of like, we want to, on the one hand, provide safe opportunities for, you know, lower income communities, minority communities to have the same benefits, but we also don't want it to feel like it's being forced upon them, which is why, you know, the rollout maybe has been a little bit slower than some other cities that had really, really robust and ambitious bike network plans before that. They were just like, we're just going to fast track everything. And you know what I mean? But I think it's a great point, and it's definitely something that we want to continue to expand at the pace that we feel like the community is, you know, feels like it's, you know, like a welcome benefit, and not like we're trying to like take their parking away or something like that to bring in, you know, gentrifiers on bikes or something like that. You know, we want to be sensitive to those optics, which, you know, it's again not perfect, but we're trying to balance a lot of different concerns. But if you're interested on, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but if you want an update on kind of what's been done and what's in the pipeline, you know, send me an email and I can put you in touch with my colleagues in the active transportation team, and I think they can give you an update.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? And again, if you didn't get your question answered or you want to follow up afterwards, send us an email. We will most definitely respond.
Thank you, William.
Thank you. All right. Well, we're at 7:45, so I guess we'll go ahead and I guess we'll go ahead and conclude it. I see stated goal is a fourfold increase in cycling across Boston. How will that ever happen? You know, I think it's
rhetorical question only, really.
Okay.
I really appreciate someone bringing up the Paris example. I don't know for a fact that they had these plans just waiting to drop from space. I think it took a certain level of vision, and you know, with climate crisis coming upon us, and you know, the existing Boston traffic crisis that we all suffer through every day, and now we've been locked in our homes for months, and it still doesn't feel safe for me to ride my bike down Columbus Avenue, and I don't even know that it will with this redesign. I mean, I think it's great that you're doing this work with bus, but places like there's an actual like bike shortage right now because people realize this is a great way to get around, and Boston is an incredibly inhospitable city to cycling, and I'd never even heard of this the Bay Street Bike Boulevard you mentioned, because how would I even get there? Because I live in Roxbury. It's a real challenging city to get around. And Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, you know, like these are places where plenty of people bike. There's people on bikes every day on Columbus Avenue, and a lot of them are like teenagers and kids. So, you know, it's not that there isn't people on bikes, there just isn't a safe place, a way to get around the city. So I appreciate this. I think this is a great project, and I appreciate the openness, but I'm very disappointed that there's a plan. We're magically going to fourfold increase our biking, but there's no street for you to actually bike on.
Yeah,
there's
I think,
something missing here.
Yeah, I think that's very fair criticism and a very accurate account of cycling in most of Boston today. You know, I wouldn't refute that at all. And I think you're right. I mean, it's something that the city needs to do better on, and we're trying to move faster to accelerate bike projects, and we're trying to like spread them throughout the city as well, so that there's a more equitable distribution of that infrastructure. And I think you're exactly right that until we start knitting that together, we're not going to get anywhere close to 8%, you know, which is what the fourfold increase means 8% of trips are being taken by bike, and we're closer to 2% today. But, you know, if you look at Somerville and Cambridge, they're a couple years ahead of us, and, you know, they're at 10, 11%. So I think there's precedent right here in our own backyard for doing it. And, you know, I understand the pace is frustrating, and you know, it's something that we just you're right as well about needing visionary leadership, and the mayor of Paris has certainly been a crusader for making that city better for walking and biking, you know. So I think I will say that I think that right now the city of Boston has a lot of exciting things going on and in the pipeline, and I truly do hope that in the next, you know, year to 3 years, I think you'll see a lot of projects start coming online that will hopefully start to address those concerns that you're talking about, because it is something that we want to get a lot better at.
That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing, and again, many thanks for this. This is an exciting project, and I ride those buses, you know, at least virus every day, and it's going to be a huge improvement.
Hi, Jeffrey again. Hello. Can you explain what the Public Improvement Commission hearing is on Thursday?
Do you want me to take that one, William, or? Oh, William might be frozen. I'm sorry. He
might be frozen, yeah.
You mentioned before that he was having computer issues. So I heard your question, though. So for those of you who don't know, the Public Improvement Commission is the city's way to confirm major roadway projects and major utility projects. So we were originally going to bring this project to PIC for a hearing on Thursday, but that timeline has been moved back to August for now. So that will basically just kind of review with all of the major city agencies the sort of scope of the project, the intent of the project, and then confirm that, you know, sort of all of the major city agencies have weighed in. So whether it be Parks Department, Boston Water and Sewer, again, confirming that we've contacted all of the major utility companies to make sure that there aren't any, gas mains, water mains, electrical conduits that we're missing. So that's really the sort of rationale behind the PIC, and it looks like we're probably going to go before that committee in August, late August at this point. And just to confirm, William's internet dropped, so he asked me to please answer any follow-up questions or close out the meeting if there's any more questions. All right. Oh, William's back. So I guess going once, going twice, and thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate your time tonight. Any follow-up questions? My email is on the flyers. I can also leave it in the chat, and then William, Eric, and I can all sort of follow up if there's any additional thoughts or feedback. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.